The night Grant chose not to speak was the night Elena stopped filling in the blanks for him. Have you ever sat across from someone you love, watching them avoid the truth with gentle words and clean routines? Elena Merrin wasn't angry, but she was starting to wonder if the man she shared a home with still believed in sharing anything else. How long can love last when one person refuses to be fully seen? The townhouse sat on the edge of Windmere Point, where the breeze always smelled like salt and the ocean didn't ask questions. Grant Merrin had built his life like a closed folder, neatly bound, professionally branded, nothing leaking past the edges. He ran a private firm with national contracts and international investors. Every inch of him spoke stability, crisp shirts, precise language, and expressions that rarely moved unless planned. He was the kind of man people trusted easily but understood slowly. Elena knew that. She had loved that. But lately, she didn't know if what she loved was still being offered, or if she was simply guarding a version of him she'd imagined longer than she should have. That night over dinner, the pasta steamed between them while the silence grew cool. Elena twirled her fork slowly, then paused. "You've been quieter than usual," she said. Grant looked up. His half-smile was careful, like it had been waiting in reserve. "Work's heavy." "It's always heavy." He didn't reply, just nodded. Sipped water. Passed the breadbasket. The lights were soft. The kitchen spotless. The air held no tension, but no warmth either. They used to talk here. Now, they moved in synchronized habits. Elena cooked, Grant cleared. She read on the couch. He took calls in his office. They slept in the same bed, but woke with their backs turned. Elena wasn't looking for drama. She wasn't even sure she wanted answers. But lately, stillness felt less like comfort and more like erasure. The next morning, Grant left early, before the sun had fully broken through the kitchen blinds. Elena stood at the sink, holding her mug like a lifeline, watching the light spill slowly onto the counter. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, bookstore shift, 11 a.m. The volunteer role had started 3 months ago. She had said it was just something to fill the time. Grant had smiled then, kissed her hair. Calm work for a calm soul. He had no idea that dust and dog-eared covers gave her more emotional clarity than the conference calls echoing from his office ever could. The bookstore, Shelbourne Reads, stood 2 blocks from their home. It wasn't trendy. It didn't host influencer events, but it had charm, the kind built by community and wooden shelves that creaked when touched. Elena wore jeans and a soft cardigan. No makeup. No filters. She greeted Mrs. Langley, the owner, then slipped into the quiet rhythm of sorting donations. Some were classics. Some were junk. And then there was a small green hardback with no spine text, just a handwritten label inside, for archive. She opened it, gently. Inside the cover, someone had scribbled a dedication in blue ink. To G.L. Merrin, who taught me that failure is only silence by another name. Elena froze. Her hands didn't shake, but her heart did something odd. A pause, then a thud. G.L. Merrin. Grant's full initials. He never used them now, but she remembered them from an old file folder in the back of their home office. Once, long ago, he told her he used to write under that name, back when I thought poetry could pay rent. He had laughed. She hadn't pressed. Now the book stared at her like a thread that had always been there, just waiting for her to pull. That evening, she didn't mention it. She placed the book quietly in her canvas tote. At home, she cooked lemon rice and baked cod. They ate on the patio. Talk was light, weather, the neighbor's barking dog, a headline Grant skimmed but didn't read. Afterward, she placed the green book on the edge of his desk. No post-it, no explanation. She turned off the light and went upstairs. The next morning, when she came down for coffee, the book had moved. Not far, just closer to the center of the desk, where his laptop usually sat. She noticed it right away. So did he, when he came back in from his run. He paused beside the desk, reached for the towel on his shoulder, looked at the book, looked at her. He didn't say a word. She didn't either. Because sometimes silence isn't absence, it's weight, and she needed to know if he would carry it with her or continue pretending he didn't notice how heavy it had become. The book sat untouched for 3 days. Grant didn't move it again. He didn't ask about it, didn't open it while Elena was in the room. But she saw him glance at it. Once during breakfast, his eyes lingered on the spine while sipping his coffee. Another time, he returned from a late meeting, loosened his tie, and stood in front of it with a stillness that said more than movement. On the 4th day, Elena left early for the bookstore. No goodbye, no note, just silence, matching his. At Shelburne Reed's, Mrs. Langley handed her a box of fiction titles to shelve. "Your husband stopped by yesterday," she said, almost casually. Elena paused, holding a paperback halfway to the shelf. "He did?" "He didn't stay long. Said he was looking for something from the archives. Didn't say what." Elena nodded. So, he was reaching. Quietly, slowly. Back home that evening, the book was gone from his desk. In its place was a folded page torn from a yellow legal pad. Her name was at the top. She unfolded it. The dedication was real. "I edited that manuscript before I quit, before everything else changed. I don't know what seeing it again means to you, but it brought something back I'd buried without knowing." No signature, but it didn't need one. She folded the page carefully and tucked it into her own journal. That weekend, he offered to take her to the garden center. She almost declined out of habit, but something in his voice made her say yes. They walked slowly past hanging plants and rosemary pots. "I was thinking of tomatoes," he said. "They're fussy, but you can taste when they're grown at home." Elena raised a brow. "You planning to become a gardener now?" "I'm planning to try something that doesn't involve spreadsheets." It wasn't a joke. Or, if it was, it wasn't meant to be funny. They picked tomatoes, and lavender, and basil that smelled like memory. At checkout, he paid in cash, said it reminded him of college, back when receipts were optional. Elena smiled politely, but she saw it. The look in his eyes that said he was trying to let her in, without words, without performance. Back home, he set up pots on the porch. They planted side by side. No music, no conversation, just dirt under fingernails and silence that felt slightly less sharp. That night, Elena read in the living room while Grant finished a call upstairs. He returned with tea. Set it beside her. Sat on the far end of the couch. She closed the book. "You don't have to sit here just because I'm here." "I'm not," he said. "I want to be." She studied him for a moment. He looked tired. Not worn down, but real. Not polished. "Do you remember what you used to write about?" she asked quietly. "Most of it wasn't good," he said, "but it was honest." She reached behind her and handed him the same book she had brought home from the store. She had placed a small bookmark in one of the stories, one that read like it had been edited with care. "This reminds me of the dedication I read," she said. He opened it, scanned, closed it. "I wrote that when I lost everything. Thought burying it would protect me." She didn't say, "From what?" She knew what. From being known in his worst chapter. He didn't elaborate, just looked at her like he was waiting to see if she'd ask him to say more. She didn't. Instead, she said, "I'm glad it didn't stay buried." That night, he didn't kiss her. He didn't reach for her. But he sat close enough that their shoulders touched as the candle flickered nearby. He reached down once, gently took her hand, and gave it one short, intentional squeeze. Like saying, "I'm still here." She didn't pull away. Not because everything was okay, but because something was beginning again. On Monday, Grant left his phone on the kitchen counter while pouring his coffee. That never happened. Elena noticed, said nothing. The screen lit up once. The contact was saved under initials, LL. She filed it away without judgment. Later that night, when he returned from work, he stood by the window longer than usual. Elena was slicing peppers in the kitchen. He didn't say anything, but she saw his reflection in the glass, shoulders tighter than normal. When he finally turned around, his voice was soft. "You got everything you needed from the market?" "Mostly," she said. He walked over, picked up a slice of red pepper from the cutting board, popped it into his mouth. There was a moment where she expected him to pivot. ask about her day, mention a meeting, change the subject. Instead, he said, "That phone call you saw, it was someone from my past, from when I was trying to publish. She's reaching out again." Elena didn't stop chopping. "Was she part of what you buried?" "Yes." "Is she part of what you still carry?" His pause was brief but honest, only in memory. "I didn't expect the memory to write back." Elena nodded. "I found a manuscript you never mentioned. Is there more you left behind?" Grant leaned against the counter. "Parts I thought didn't matter anymore. But they mattered enough to hide," she said, not as an accusation but as a statement. He met her eyes. For a full beat. There was no defense, no retreat. Just realization. "I never wanted to make you feel like you were outside of my story." "You didn't," she replied. "But I started to wonder if I was only reading the parts you were willing to print." He dropped his head briefly, then exhaled. "That's fair." She handed him a piece of paper. "Then start from the next chapter, if you want." He accepted it, chewed slowly. "I'd like to." Later, when they cleared the dishes, he didn't walk back into his office. He followed her into the living room, sat beside her again. No distractions, no laptop. They didn't talk much, but his body angled toward her this time. When she placed her book down, he didn't move. He just sat there, quiet, but not absent. Have you ever reached a moment where you didn't need someone to explain their silence, just to break it with presence? The next week passed like low tide, steady, shallow, quiet. Grant left earlier for work. Elena didn't mind. She used the time to repot the basil, organize her closet, and walk down to the bookstore in the afternoons. She didn't tell him everything she did. And for once, she didn't feel guilty about that. Privacy wasn't just his anymore. On Wednesday, she arrived at Shelburne Reed's to find Mrs. Langley deep in conversation with a teenage boy and his mother. Elena offered a quiet smile and slipped behind the counter. She liked shelving best, no one watching, no words required. As she restocked the memoir section, her fingers brushed against another green spine, similar to the one from before. It wasn't the same book, but the style matched. Clean linen cover, no title on the front. Inside, there was a faint stamp, Verdant Press, Contributor Archive. She opened to the table of contents. One name stood out, G.L. Merrin. Again, she closed the book and held it in her lap. It wasn't that Grant had published something and never told her. That wasn't the point. It was that he had been someone else once, and that version of him still lived somewhere, quietly, carefully, untouched. That evening, she made butternut squash soup. He walked in late, dropped his briefcase, loosened his tie. "It smells like fall," he said, stepping into the kitchen. Elena nodded, ladling soup into 2 bowls. She handed him one. They sat. It wasn't tense, but the air had weight again. "Did you ever think about trying again?" she asked, breaking a long silence. "With writing? With anything you once left behind?" He stirred his spoon slowly. "I used to think letting go meant moving forward. And now?" He looked at her. "I think maybe I confused reinvention with running." Elena nodded once. "You never showed me any of it." "Not one thing." He didn't defend himself. "I thought if I kept it buried, it couldn't make me fail again." "Then you were never failing. You were hiding." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Grant pushed his bowl aside slightly and rubbed his hands together. "I still have some of it," he said. "Old drafts, notes, one full manuscript I never submitted. What's it called?" "Stillwater Hollow." She blinked. "Like the letter." His eyebrows lifted. "What letter?" "The one addressed to G.L. Merrin," she said softly. "It came in the mail a few days ago. From a publisher." He sat back slowly. "I didn't see it. I left it on your desk." "I haven't looked at my desk in days." She believed him. For once, his surprise felt real. "I'll show it to you," she said, standing up. But she didn't go get it right away. She waited. Because that space between what they say and what they do, that's where trust rebuilds or dies. Later that night, Grant returned from brushing his teeth to find the letter waiting on his pillow. Unopened. The cream-colored envelope sat beside a folded shirt. Elena had already turned off her bedside light. He picked it up, opened it, slowly, read it in silence, then placed it face down on the nightstand. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. But something shifted. In the morning, she found him at the dining table with his laptop open, not for emails but for writing. Word processor, blank page, cursor blinking. She didn't speak, just kissed his cheek as she passed and poured her coffee. It was a quiet kind of permission. They planted the lavender that weekend, side by side in the sunlight. Grant pulled weeds while Elena loosened the roots. He asked her questions about the bookstore. She told him about a child who refused to read unless she was the one picking the story. "She said I sound like the moon," Elena said, smiling. Grant looked at her with real warmth. "You do." She didn't need flowers. She didn't need declarations. That moment, that sentence, it stayed. At the end of the day, as they washed the dirt from their hands, Grant paused. "I've been thinking about Stillwater Hollow." Elena didn't interrupt. "I wrote it when I thought I had nothing left. I was angry, broke, and embarrassed. I hated how soft it sounded, how personal it felt. But you didn't throw it away," she said. "No." "I printed a copy. I buried it in a folder marked irrelevant. Do you want to find it?" He wiped his hands on the towel and nodded. "I think it's time." They spent the evening in the garage, sorting through old boxes. Tax files, travel documents, a box labeled college, and then, finally, one labeled Verdant. Inside, 3 printed manuscripts, a notebook with sketches of small-town maps, and a rejection letter that had yellowed over time. He handed her the notebook. "Page 17, he said. She flipped. A scene about a woman who waits quietly while her husband writes through failure. She waits. Grant had scribbled in the margin, not because she's weak, but because she sees what he can't say yet. Elena felt her throat tighten. "She sounds like someone I know," he said softly. She closed the notebook and looked at him. "Then maybe it's time you let her speak." By Sunday evening, the manuscript sat on their kitchen table like a visitor no one had invited in years. Stillwater Hollow, rough printout, spiral bound. The title in faded ink. Elena didn't touch it. She waited. Grant poured them both tea. Mint for her, Earl Grey for himself. He didn't sit yet. He stood behind his chair, hands flat on the table. "I never read it after I printed it," he said. "It felt too close, too raw." "Maybe that's what makes it worth something," Elena said quietly. He sat down, pushed it toward her. "You can read it, if you want." She didn't open it. "Not right away. Do you?" He looked at her. A moment passed before he answered. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to keep pretending it doesn't exist." Elena nodded. "I won't read it like a critic," she said. "I'll read it like your wife." Grant looked relieved. Not comforted, not proud. Relieved. That night, Elena read the first 5 pages. It wasn't polished, but it was real. A story about a man who fled to a coastal town after a business failure, hiding from everyone, including himself. The main character renovated old homes no one wanted. He didn't speak much. He spent evenings watching the tide roll in. By page 4, the man meets a bookstore clerk who never asks questions. She just makes room. In her store. In her voice. Eventually in his life. Elena closed the manuscript softly. Her heart ached, in a way that wasn't pain but recognition. This wasn't fiction. It was Grant, written out loud. And somehow, he had written her before he'd ever met her. The next morning, Grant waited by the stove with 2 mugs in hand. "You read it," he said. Elena nodded. "You wrote like someone who didn't expect a future," she said. "I didn't, but you still built one." He exhaled. It didn't feel like building. It felt like running until no one could trace the wreckage. She set her mug down. "And what do you think now?" Grant didn't answer at first. Now I think love doesn't care about the wreckage. It just wants to know if you'll stop running." Later that week, Elena shared the story with Mrs. Langley. Just a page. She didn't say who wrote it. She simply said, "It was never published, but I think it matters." Mrs. Langley read it, then placed it in a folder marked Local Voices. "If this ever goes public," she said gently, "it deserves to be read." Elena tucked the folder back in the drawer. Not now, but maybe soon. That weekend, they walked to the farmer's market, something they hadn't done in months. Grant bought honey from a quiet old man in suspenders. Elena browsed used books and found a copy of Letters to a Young Poet. When they returned home, she found Grant standing at the kitchen counter, flipping through the manuscript again. "Do you think anyone would want this?" he asked, almost shyly. "Someone already does," she said, pointing to herself, "and I think others might too. If you're ready." He nodded. "Then maybe I'll revise it." Elena smiled. "Not to make it perfect," she said, "just to let it live." That night, Grant stayed up late typing. He didn't say goodnight right away. But before Elena went to bed, he paused his work, stood up, and wrapped his arms around her. No agenda. Just him, present. Spring arrived with longer evenings and air that smelled like new beginnings. Grant had started leaving the office a little earlier each day. Not by much, 15 minutes, 20. But, Elena noticed, he'd come home, loosen his tie, and linger. In the doorway, at the kitchen counter, in her presence. It wasn't a grand shift, but it was honest. On a sunny Saturday, their neighborhood held a spring potluck in the park just a few blocks from their street. The kind of event where everyone brought too much potato salad and wore faded denim instead of suits. Elena baked cornbread. Grant brought sparkling water in a cooler. They arrived together but moved separately. Elena chatting with a group of women near the picnic tables, Grant shaking hands with 2 other men near the grill. For a while, it felt good, normal. Until a woman in a rust-colored blouse approached Grant. "Glenwood College, right?" she said, her voice lifting with recognition. Elena, across the lawn, glanced up. She saw Grant freeze for a second. Just a second. The woman didn't wait for a response. "You used to write those incredible pieces in the alumni column. G.L. Merrin?" Grant nodded slowly. "Yes. I thought that was you." She stepped closer. "It's been what, 12 years?" He smiled, tight. "Marla, right?" "Still sharp," she said, beaming. "You were brilliant. Quiet, but brilliant." Elena walked over, placing 2 paper plates on the table. She didn't interrupt. She just made herself known. Grant turned slightly, the change in his posture subtle but unmistakable. "This is my wife, Elena," he said. "Elena, this is Marla. We knew each other in college." Elena smiled. "Nice to meet you." "You're married," Marla said, half laughing. "Somehow I'm not surprised. You always had that steady presence." Grant said nothing to that. He reached for a drink instead. Marla didn't linger. She smiled, offered a final compliment about his past writing, and excused herself to greet someone else. Back home, Elena rinsed dishes in the sink. Grant dried them beside her. He hadn't said anything about Marla, and she hadn't asked. But the silence between them tonight felt different, charged. When the final plate clinked into the cabinet, he spoke. "I didn't expect to see her." Elena nodded. "She's part of that old life," he continued. "The one I closed the door on when I stopped writing." "Did she know you well?" Elena asked. Grant leaned back against the counter. "Not really. We were in the same writing group. She read my stuff, I read hers. We shared critiques, that's all." Still, she remembered. "I don't think I ever really forgot her either, or that version of me." Elena wiped her hands on the towel. "I'm not jealous, if that's what you're wondering." Grant looked surprised. "You're not?" "No," she said gently. "But I do wonder how many people still carry pieces of the man I never got to know." That hit him harder than any accusation would have. He reached for her hand, held it without words. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I kept you out, thinking I was protecting you, or maybe protecting myself. Elena didn't pull away. I don't need warnings, Grant, she said. I need you to be present, before the moment makes you scramble. The next morning, he showed up at Shelburne Reed's. Elena was halfway through organizing a display table when the bell over the door chimed. She looked up. Grant stood there, holding 2 coffees. One in her favorite oat milk blend. He didn't speak, just offered the cup and settled quietly into a reading chair near the back. Elena didn't approach him. She returned to her work, but her heart softened as she watched him settle into a book. At closing, she found a note tucked beside the register. Lunch later? It was his handwriting. They met at the deli across the street. Conversation came slowly, but it came. They talked about the book he was revising, about the child she read to last Thursday who refused to listen unless Elena used a pirate voice. At one point he said, "I miss this." Elena didn't ask, what changed? She knew. He had, not fully, not loudly, but steadily. 2 weeks passed. Grant became a quiet regular at the bookstore, Tuesdays and Thursdays, always with coffee, sometimes with a pastry, never demanding her attention, just offering presence. He didn't hover. He stayed, and Elena, who had stopped expecting him to reach, found herself reaching back, not because of apology, but because of rhythm. On Thursday, the rain arrived before noon, brushing against the bookstore's windows in soft taps. Elena liked the quiet it brought. Customers walked slower, spoke in low tones. The world paused in a way that made her feel everything more clearly. Grant came in at 10:45. He didn't say much, just slid her coffee across the counter and took his usual seat by the corner window. Elena shelved returns in the biography section, but she could feel his presence. It wasn't heavy. It didn't ask. It simply stayed. That had become the thing she noticed most, not the grand apologies, not the long explanations, but the staying. Grant, for all his professionalism and polish, had never been taught how to stay emotionally. He had always moved forward, project to project, success to success, like momentum alone could erase the ache behind him. But now, his stillness was louder than anything he could have said. That afternoon, a woman named Dana came in with her 7-year-old son. Elena had met them before. Dana worked weekends at the bakery, and her son, Max, was quiet until he wasn't. Max made a beeline for the children's nook. Grant glanced up, offered a small smile, then returned to his book. Dana stood by the register, flustered. "Sorry, he's been wired since this morning. I tried giving him a book, but he says reading is boring unless Mrs. Elena reads it." Elena smiled. "Then we have no choice." She walked toward the nook, sat cross-legged beside Max, and pulled a picture book from the bin. Grant watched from his seat, his book resting forgotten on his lap. As Elena read, Max's entire posture changed. He leaned in, giggled in the right places, interrupted with questions only 7-year-olds think to ask. When she finished, Max grinned. "You read like the lady in my dreams." Elena laughed. "That's a high compliment." Dana thanked her on the way out, mouthing lifesaver behind Max's back. Grant stood when the bell jingled closed. "She really looks up to you," he said. "I think she's just tired," Elena replied, wiping her hands on her jeans. "No, she sees the way you make space for people. It's rare." Elena turned to him. "So is someone who shows up and doesn't need a performance in return." He hesitated. "I'm trying." "I see that." They stood there, surrounded by worn shelves and rain-glazed glass. It didn't feel like reconciliation. It felt like permission to keep showing up imperfectly. That weekend, Elena brought out the manuscript. Stillwater Hollow sat on the coffee table like it had never left. "I think I'm ready to read more," she said. Grant nodded. "Would you want to read it with me?" Elena smiled. "You sure? I want to know how it feels to share it with someone who matters." They read 2 chapters that night, one aloud, one silently. The story deepened. The character, Rowan, rebuilt a house by the sea, piece by piece. His only companion, a woman who ran a small bookstore, never asked why he showed up late or why his hands shook. She simply let him be there. When Elena closed the chapter, she wiped her eyes discreetly. "It's more than good, Grant," she said. "It's honest. That scares me." She looked at him. "It should. That means it matters." The next few days blurred into a gentle rhythm. Mornings started with shared coffee. Evenings often ended with quiet couch time. No pressure, no roles to play, just presence. And then, on Tuesday, a package arrived, unmarked. Inside, a smaller green book. No title, no publisher's stamp, but the dedication inside was fresh. "To the woman who read me back to life." Elena stared at the inscription. Her breath caught. "I printed it myself," Grant said from behind her. "Just one copy. For now." She turned to him, eyes full but quiet. "I wanted you to have it first," he said. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, not in surprise, but in understanding. He didn't resist. He folded into her embrace. There was nothing more to say. The morning it arrived, Elena almost tossed it out. It came buried in a stack of catalogues and political flyers, just a cream-colored envelope with no return address and a slightly smudged postmark. But something about the weight of it, the thickness of the paper, made her pause. She brought it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and forgot about it while boiling water for tea. Grant was still upstairs, working through a late client report. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the kettle and the distant tick of the hallway clock. Elena returned to the envelope after steeping her tea. She slit the top open gently, expecting an invitation, or maybe a charity solicitation. What she pulled out was a letter printed on thick parchment and addressed to G.L. Merrin, subject, Stillwater Hollow, submission follow-up. Her stomach sank. She sat at the counter and read, "Dear G.L. Merrin, we sincerely apologize for the delay in response. Your manuscript, Stillwater Hollow, was received in our archives during our merger process and was unfortunately misfiled. Upon recent review, we were deeply moved by the voice and emotional depth of your submission." Elena stopped reading. The date on the letter was recent. It wasn't a leftover from years ago. This was a follow-up Grant had never seen. Her hand tightened on the paper. She stood, walked toward his office, and froze. He was on a video call. She turned around, went back to the kitchen, and placed the letter right beside his favorite pen on the table. Then she went upstairs, sat in the bedroom, and waited without waiting. Not for an apology, not even for a thank you, but to see what he would do with the truth, now that it had arrived too late and yet exactly on time. It took him hours to find it. Elena heard the soft rustle of paper, then silence, then footsteps. He didn't come up right away. He went to the porch. She peeked from the stairs. He stood barefoot on the wood planks, the letter in one hand, the other pressed against his lips. A long moment passed. Then he came inside and found her in the hallway. "I had no idea it was still circulating," he said quietly. "I believe you." They liked it. I did too. He stared at her, something heavy behind his eyes. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it yet," she said. "But don't pretend it didn't happen." He looked down at the letter. 10 years ago, I would have built my whole life around this kind of response. And now I want my life to mean something even without it. Elena stepped closer. "It already does." That evening, he didn't return to his laptop. He sat beside her on the couch with the letter folded on the coffee table. They didn't read from the manuscript. They didn't talk about publishing. Instead, Elena told him about the little girl at the bookstore who thought the smell of pages was how books breathed. He laughed, not loudly, but freely, and when she rested her head on his shoulder, he didn't move for a long time. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Grant hesitated by the nightstand. The letter sat there now, next to Stillwater Hollow. He reached for both, then stopped. "Elena," he said, voice low, "do you think there's any part of me that I've shared fully with you?" She met his eyes in the mirror. "Not all at once," she said, "but piece by piece, yes. And not because I pulled it out of you, but because you placed it in front of me when you were ready." He swallowed. "I've made it hard for you to stay." "No," she said. "You made it hard for me to see if you were staying too." At midnight, Elena woke to find the bed empty. She went downstairs. Grant sat at the kitchen table, manuscript open beside a pen and a notepad. He looked up. "I think I want to finish it," he said. "Not for them, not for publishing, but for me." Elena walked over, placed her hand on the back of his neck, and gently leaned her forehead against his. "Then start where you left off," she whispered. Grant didn't sleep much that week, not because of stress, not because of work, but because the manuscript whispered to him, gently, patiently, like it had been waiting for him to return with more years behind his words. Elena noticed. His eyes were a little softer in the morning, his voice a little slower, like he'd stopped racing time and started listening to what it was asking. She didn't hover. She didn't ask to read more. She simply made space. Coffee left at his elbow. A sandwich waiting in the fridge with a note. A single post-it. She stuck on his laptop one morning that read, "You're allowed to write, even when it's not perfect." That evening, he read those words 5 times before typing a single sentence. One night, around 9, he came into the living room while she folded laundry on the couch. "Can I read you something?" Elena nodded, setting the towel down. Grant opened his laptop, cleared his throat, and began. He didn't need to be forgiven. He needed to stop asking for it from everyone else and learn to forgive. The boy inside himself, the one who thought survival meant silence. When he finished, he didn't look up right away, but Elena had already moved closer. Her voice was soft. "That line doesn't come from ambition. It comes from knowing yourself." He nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to—" On Friday afternoon, Shelburne Reads held a small community poetry night. It wasn't fancy, folding chairs, cider in paper cups, a microphone that cut out occasionally, but it felt sincere. Mrs. Langley asked Elena to open the night with a short piece. Elena agreed, but chose something simple. A passage from a book about stillness and rain and the way people grow when no one is watching. As she stood to read, she saw Grant near the back, hands in his pockets, eyes steady on her. She didn't say his name, but the piece she read, an excerpt from Stillwater Hollow, belonged to him. No one knew, except him. When she returned to her seat, he met her eyes across the room and gave the smallest nod. It said everything. They walked home slowly. It was one of those spring nights that smelled like coming rain but held back, letting the streetlights stretch long across the pavement. Grant reached for her hand. "I want to thank you," he said. "You already have." "No," he said. "I mean it, not for fixing anything, but for staying with me through things I hadn't figured out yet." Elena squeezed his hand once. "I never needed you to be finished. I needed you to be honest." They walked a few more steps before he asked, "What made you wait?" She stopped walking, then turned toward him. "Because I saw you trying, even when you thought I couldn't." Grant's shoulders relaxed. "I think I was waiting for someone to give up on me. I didn't realize someone might just give me time." At home, Grant placed the revised manuscript on the table. This version was thinner, cleaner, still imperfect, still him. "I'm not sure if I want to send it out," he said, "but it's finished." Elena nodded. Then it already did what it was meant to do. Later, while they washed up for bed, Elena stood in the bathroom doorway and watched him brush his teeth, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. There was something different about the way he carried himself, not new, not changed, but returned. And she realized with quiet gratitude that he had finally stopped protecting his past and started living with it. Mondays used to be Grant's most tightly wound days. Early meetings, phone on speaker, jacket always on. But now he stayed in soft clothes longer, brewed coffee instead of checking stocks first. The shift wasn't dramatic, but Elena felt it, the pace, the presence. She had come to understand that healing doesn't need volume, it needs space. And for the first time, their home felt like it had space again. That afternoon, Grant asked if she wanted to walk to the bookstore together. Elena hesitated. He'd never walked her there before, not even once. "Sure," she said, watching him tie his shoes. They strolled past the bakery, past the florist where Elena sometimes lingered after long shifts. As they turned the corner, a boy on a skateboard rushed past them and nearly fell. Grant instinctively reached his arm out, catching the boy just before he lost balance. "Thanks, mister," the boy mumbled. Grant smiled, his hands still open from the catch. "Be careful." They walked in silence for a few steps. "You didn't flinch," Elena said, almost to herself. Grant glanced over. Didn't feel like something to flinch from. Elena tucked that away. Another quiet shift. At Shelburne Reed's, the usual warmth greeted them. Old pine shelves, the faint scent of vanilla and pages, and the low hum of conversation. Mrs. Langley waved from the back. Grant looked around like it was the first time he was seeing the place properly. Elena went behind the counter while Grant took his spot in the corner chair, pulling a thin novel from the staff favourites shelf. He didn't say much. He rarely did. But Elena liked how he looked at the room now, not as a stranger trying to avoid being seen, but as someone who no longer minded being known. Around 3, a young man entered wearing a hoodie and holding a printout. "Hey," he said to Elena, "you're the one who read at poetry night, right?" Elena blinked. "I did, sort of. Why?" He held up the paper. "That piece you read, it stayed with me. I looked for it online. Couldn't find it. Did you write it?" Grant sat straighter in his chair. Elena shook her head slowly. "No. It was part of a longer story. Unpublished." "Well," the man said, tapping the printout, "it shouldn't stay that way. Whoever wrote it, tell them it helped someone who didn't think books could—" He left as quickly as he'd come. Grant said nothing. Elena glanced over. "That was for you." He nodded, then looked down at his book again. Later that evening, Elena made soup. Grant chopped garlic beside her without being asked. "Did you hear what he said?" she asked. "I did. And—" Grant paused. "I'm still letting it sink in." Elena didn't push. She ladled broth into bowls and set one in front of him. They ate with the windows open. The air smelled like slow rain and pine needles. Grant's foot tapped gently against hers under the table. "You don't have to publish it, you know," she said softly. "I know. But you could." He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. At bedtime, Elena found the printout sitting on her pillow, the excerpt the young man had held. Grant had folded it neatly, and on top he'd scribbled a note in pencil. One voice at a time. "Thanks for lending me yours." She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply turned off the light and reached for his hand beneath the blanket. It was already open, waiting. The next morning, Elena rose early and stepped outside barefoot. The porch was cool, damp from the night's rain. She watered the tomato plants and lavender without needing to say anything. Grant came out 5 minutes later, coffee in one hand, a folded newspaper in the other. He stood beside her, quiet. They didn't talk about the past. Not today. Some mornings weren't meant for unpacking. Some mornings were for breathing. At the bookstore, Mrs. Langley handed Elena a new shipment to shelve. "Oh," she added casually, "a journalist from the local paper called, said they heard about poetry night. Asked who wrote that anonymous piece." Elena's chest tightened. "What did you tell them?" "I said the writer wasn't seeking a spotlight, just left a mark." Grant, shelving in the next aisle, didn't look up, but his hand paused on the spine of a book. Elena smiled. "Thank you for that." Mrs. Langley winked. "Some things speak loudest when they stay unnamed." That evening, they hosted 2 friends for dinner. It was nothing grand. Pasta, salad, an old bottle of wine that had lived too long on the rack. Grant was present, fully. He laughed at jokes, asked questions, poured water without being asked. After the guests left, Elena loaded the dishwasher while Grant dried. "You surprised me tonight," she said. "How?" "You weren't watching yourself." Grant leaned on the counter. "You know, I used to think being measured made me respected. And now I wonder if it just made me distant." Elena nodded. I don't need you to be polished. I need you to be reachable. I'm learning. I can tell. Later that week, she caught him rereading his own manuscript, not revising, not judging, just rereading. He looked up and said, I'm proud of it. Even if no one else ever sees it, that's enough. It is. They didn't need an audience. Not for this. On Saturday, Elena found an old picture in a drawer. Grant, maybe 24, sitting at a desk surrounded by notebooks and coffee cups. His expression was unreadable. She left it on his pillow. When he saw it, he didn't flinch. Where was this? He asked. From a box in the hall closet. You kept everything, except this part of you. He studied the photo. I remember feeling so far behind back then. You weren't behind, she said. You were becoming. That night, they stood on the porch again. No big talks. No deep reflection. Just hands wrapped around mugs, their shoulders brushing with each quiet shift. Elena rested her head on his chest. I'm glad you stayed, she said. Grant kissed the top of her hair. I didn't always know how. You don't have to be perfect. Just present. He exhaled, long and slow. I think I finally believe that. Before going inside, Elena paused to ask, do you think you'll ever let the world read your book? Grant didn't answer right away. Then, maybe. But whether I do or not, the person who mattered most already read it. She smiled, turned the porch light off, and followed him in. The first time Grant volunteered at the community reading hour, he didn't speak for 15 minutes. He stood in the back of the bookstore's children's corner, sipping lukewarm coffee, arms crossed, not defensive, just uncertain. Elena watched from across the room as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. The kids sat in a loose circle on carpet squares, some whispering, some half listening, a few already captivated by the woman reading aloud, Mrs. Langley herself, animated and warm. Grant stayed still, not in the way he used to, the kind that closed off, but in the way someone does when they're letting new things touch parts of them they've ignored too long. When Elena joined the circle and took over for the next book, Grant finally stepped forward. He didn't sit. He crouched down next to a boy who kept fidgeting. The boy whispered, I don't like this one. Grant leaned in. Which stories do you like? The boy shrugged. Well, when I was your age, I liked the ones where someone had to fix something without magic. The boy looked up. That sounds boring. Grant grinned. Sometimes boring things teach you how to stay. The boy didn't understand, but Elena did. After the session, as the kids filtered out with parents and cookies, Elena approached him by the counter. You okay? She asked. He nodded. Better than okay. You didn't seem sure at first. I wasn't. But then I remembered, these kids don't need me to perform. They just need me to be there. Elena smiled. That's the point. That night, Grant dug out a box of old writing notebooks and began going through them. Not to recycle, to remember. I used to write everything in first person, he said, flipping through pages filled with crossed-out sentences. Because it felt closer. Because I didn't know how to tell a story if I wasn't inside it. Elena rested a hand on his knee. You're still inside it. You've just stopped hiding in the margins. The next week, Grant returned to reading hour. This time he brought a book. He didn't read it aloud. He offered it to one of the quieter girls who never picked a title herself. Want me to sit with you while you read? He asked. She nodded slowly. So he did. They didn't talk much, but her finger traced every line, and his hand stayed open beside hers. Mrs. Langley later pulled Elena aside. He's not just showing up, she said. He's settling in. Elena's eyes stung a little, but she nodded. He is. Back home, Elena asked him gently, why now? What made you finally stay? Grant leaned against the doorframe. You did, he said. Then after a pause, and me. I let myself. Oh, they had dinner on the back porch, tomatoes from their own plant sliced on toast with herbs. Simple. Present. When the breeze picked up, Elena pulled her cardigan tighter. Grant stood, went inside, and returned with her heavier sweater. She looked up. You remember this? You wore it our first winter here. You said it felt like home. Elena's throat caught. It still did. That night, Grant opened Stillwater Hollow again. Not to edit, but to add something. A short chapter, not about heartbreak or failure, but about staying. A man sitting beside a child who reads slowly and asks no questions. A man who no longer needs to explain how he got there, only that he doesn't plan to leave. Have you ever tried showing up, not with promises, not with perfection, but with presence that says, "I'm still here"? The story hour became their rhythm, not a performance, not something to post about, just a habit built slowly, week by week. Grant never became the loudest in the room. He didn't need to be. His strength came from the way he sat next to the kids who didn't speak up, the ones who needed patience, not instructions. One boy, Nico, always came in with tangled shoelaces and a reluctant frown. For 3 weeks, he barely made eye contact. On the 4th, Grant offered him a picture book about how buildings don't stand unless their foundations are steady. Nico read the first 3 pages aloud, slowly, then stopped. "This book is about me," he said, almost without thinking. Grant said nothing, just smiled and kept his hand resting lightly on the page. Elena, shelving across the room, saw it all. And she felt something shift, not just in the kids, in Grant. That night, after they locked up, Elena reached for his hand before stepping off the porch. "You're different," she said. Grant looked at her, then looked away. "Do you like the version of me now more than before?" Elena paused. "I don't compare them." He raised an eyebrow. "I just recognize you better now," she said. "You're not edited." Grant exhaled. "I was scared you only loved the curated version, the one I knew how to present." "I didn't marry a presentation," she replied. "I married the pauses too." They walked through the neighborhood slowly. The sidewalks were uneven in places, but Grant didn't rush her. His steps matched hers naturally now. When they passed a neighbor's yard, the motion light flicked on, catching them mid-step. "You ever think we came back to life quietly?" Elena asked. Grant chuckled. "Like we didn't even notice." "Exactly. Like we walked into the room where everything was waiting, and just stayed." He nodded. "That's the kind of story I want to write." Later that week, he printed a new version of Stillwater Hollow. This one had a new final chapter. He left it on Elena's side of the bed with a note clipped to the front. "No pressure, just pages. Read if you feel like knowing the ending." She waited until Sunday afternoon to read it. It opened with a man building a bookshelf with uneven nails. The structure wobbled. He rebuilt it. Took his time. Then a scene with a little girl asking why grown-ups stopped trying when things got hard. Then one quiet paragraph. He hadn't needed permission to heal. He needed someone who didn't flinch when he forgot how. Elena closed the folder gently, her hand pressed against the page. It wasn't just his writing that had matured. It was the man behind it. That evening, she brought the printed manuscript to the bookstore. Mrs. Langley was closing up. "I want to place this in the local Voices shelf," Elena said. "Not for sale, just for sitting there." Quietly, Mrs. Langley scanned the pages. "Is it his?" Elena nodded. "He's ready for this?" "I think so," Elena said. "And if he's not, he'll say so when he sees it." They slipped the manuscript between 2 hardcovers. No label, no tag. Just a story with its spine facing outward, waiting for whoever needed it. "At home," Elena told Grant, "there's a place for your story now. Not online, not in print, just on a shelf, where real people browse." He blinked once. "You did that?" "Yes, because the story matters, even if it never travels far." Grant took a long breath. "You know what the most terrifying thing is?" "What?" "That it might not matter to anyone else." Elena stepped closer. "That's not the fear talking. That's your past." He nodded, slowly. She placed a hand on his chest. "Your story already mattered. To the boy who read 3 pages. To the man who wrote again after a decade. To me." Grant kissed her forehead. "I want to believe that." "You don't have to want to," she whispered. You're living it. A week later, a teenage girl checked out Stillwater Hollow from the local Voices shelf. Mrs. Langley snapped a photo, sent it to Elena. The caption read, "First reader, didn't ask who wrote it, just said it felt honest." Elena showed Grant the photo that evening. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "That's more than I thought I could ask for." They lay in bed that night, the window open to the sound of rustling leaves. Elena curled beside him. "You ever think people assume love is loud?" he asked. "I think people assume if it's not loud, it's gone. But ours wasn't." "No," she said. "Ours just learned how to listen before it spoke." He turned toward her, pressing his lips gently to her temple. "And I learned how to speak, because you stayed." Elena smiled into his shoulder. "That's the story I'll always want to read." The bell above the bookstore door rang at 10:30 on a breezy Thursday morning. Elena was arranging new arrivals near the window. She looked up expecting a regular, but instead, Marla stepped in, rust-colored blouse again, eyes scanning the space like she hadn't been back in years. Grant wasn't there. Elena smiled gently. "Hi," Marla nodded. "I wasn't sure if you'd recognize me." "I do." A pause. "I hope it's okay. I came in." "Of course." Marla walked slowly along the shelves. "I was passing through. Something told me to stop in." Elena didn't press. Marla reached the local Voices section. Her fingers paused on a slim manuscript tucked between two memoirs. She pulled it halfway out. "Stillwater Hollow," she murmured. "That's a name I haven't heard in forever." Elena felt something tighten in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "You know it?" "I remember him writing parts of it," Marla said. "Back when we were in that messy little poetry circle, he never let us read the full thing, said it was still breathing." "He still says that," Elena said softly. Marla looked up. "So this is his?" Elena nodded. Marla set the manuscript back carefully. "I'm glad he finished it." Another pause. Elena leaned slightly on the counter. "He almost didn't." "I figured." Marla stepped closer, her voice lowered. "He used to carry everything like it was private property. His failures, his hopes, even the good things. He still carries things," Elena said. "But he stopped locking the door behind him." Marla smiled. "That's good." They stood quietly for a moment, the air between them respectful, not tense. "I didn't come here to interrupt anything," Marla said. I think I needed to see if he'd finally let himself be known." Elena's throat caught for a second, but she breathed through it. "He has, in his own way." Marla nodded. "Then he's lucky." "No," Elena said. "We both are. Because neither of us walked away when we didn't understand each other yet." That answer seemed to settle something in Marla. She stepped back, glanced one more time at the manuscript, and said, "Tell him I said thank you, for finishing it, and for growing." Elena tilted her head. "You could tell him yourself." Marla smiled again, this time fuller. "I already did." That evening, Elena told Grant. They were sitting on the porch, the evening sun soft and gold against their legs. "She came in today." Grant's face didn't tighten. He didn't shift away. "Marla?" "Yes." "What did she say?" "That she was glad you finished the book. That she remembered the version of you who never let anyone see the full thing." Grant stared ahead for a moment. "That's fair." She wasn't angry, just reflective. He nodded slowly. "She didn't want anything," Elena added. "Only to know you became someone who stopped hiding." He turned to her. "And what did you say?" "I said you were lucky." He raised an eyebrow. "To be known?" "No," Elena said. "To be given the space to become someone worth knowing." Grant looked down, then reached for her hand. He held it between both of his. "You gave me that space." "I protected it," she corrected. "But you chose to step into it. That part was never mine to do for you." Later that night, Elena found Grant sitting at his desk, staring at the last page of Stillwater Hollow. Not reading, not editing, just sitting with it. He caught her in the doorway. "I didn't realize how many people saw pieces of me before I did." "You weren't ready to look then." He nodded. "But I am now." Elena stepped inside, wrapped her arms around his shoulders from behind, and rested her chin there. "You're not the man you used to be." "No," he whispered. "But I think I'm finally someone I trust." On Sunday morning, the sun rose behind grey clouds, casting a soft filter over everything. It wasn't gloomy, just quiet, like the day itself had decided not to rush. Elena stood at the window, watching the breeze move through the trees. Grant was still asleep, one arm flung gently across her side of the bed. His breathing was steady, unhurried. She didn't wake him. She walked barefoot into the kitchen, brewed coffee, and sat with her journal open but untouched. There were no problems to fix, no silences to translate, just time and space, and a man upstairs who no longer needed to be convinced that he belonged. That afternoon, Elena visited the bookstore alone. Mrs. Langley was off for the day, and Elena wanted to reorganize the local voices section. She didn't expect anyone to come in. It was a slow day, overcast and quiet. But just before 3, a woman in her late 40s walked through the door. She looked unsure, like someone who hadn't entered a bookstore in years. Elena greeted her gently. Looking for something in particular? The woman hesitated. Someone told me about a story here, not published, something about a man and a small town. They said it felt like being understood. Elena felt her heart settle. "Stillwater Hollow," she said. The woman nodded. "Yes, that's it." Elena walked her to the shelf, pulled out the manuscript and handed it over. "I don't know who wrote it," the woman said, turning the pages gently. "But the person who recommended it said it helped her say something she hadn't been able to say for years." Elena smiled softly. "Then maybe it's already doing what it was meant to." The woman didn't stay long. But before she left, she turned back and said, "Thank whoever wrote this, even if it was just for themselves." That evening, Elena relayed the story to Grant as they sat beneath the soft yellow light of the porch lamp. Grant leaned back in the chair, eyes on the fading sky. "I still haven't decided if I want to attach my name to it publicly," he said. "You don't have to." "I know, but if you did, what would change?" He thought for a moment. "I think I'd stop worrying whether the past makes me small, and start believing it makes me steady." Elena watched him closely. "Is that who you are now?" He turned toward her. "It's who I'm becoming." The next day, Elena invited her colleague Erin, who ran a small-town blog, to coffee. She brought a copy of Stillwater Hollow. "This isn't a marketing push," she said. "It's just a story. If you read it and think someone else might need it, share it. No pressure." Erin read the first page before she left the cafe. Later that night, she posted on the blog. No cover, no author bio. Just a story about leaving, losing, and deciding to stay. Sometimes we don't need heroes. We need people who finally stop running. Grant read the post in the living room, laptop balanced on his knees. He closed it after the last line and sat in silence. Then he walked into the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a Sharpie. On the inside cover of the extra manuscript copy, he wrote 3 words, "By Grant Merrin," and underneath it, "Written for the silence that tried to bury me, and for the woman who refused to let me disappear." He placed the book on the table and left it there for Elena to find. When she saw it, she didn't call out. She sat down, read the inscription twice, and ran her fingers gently along the letters. Grant entered a moment later. He saw her holding it. "I'm ready," he said. She smiled. "You always were," she said. "You just needed to stop asking if permission was required." He reached for her hand, held it, not like a grand gesture, like something he knew he was allowed to do now, not because she gave him permission, but because he had finally stopped hiding from himself. That weekend, Shelburne Reads hosted a quiet open mic. Local authors and lost pages, Mrs. Langley called it. Grant didn't plan to read. But 5 minutes before it started, he tapped Elena's shoulder. "If I don't do it now, I'll talk myself out of it." She nodded. "I'm with you," she said. When he stepped to the front of the small crowd, no one knew his name. But when he read that same paragraph from Stillwater Hollow, about building a shelf that kept falling, and the woman who sat beside him as he tried again, the room changed. Not loudly, but unmistakably. Afterward, no one asked for a signature. No one flooded him with praise. But one older man in a worn flannel shirt shook his hand and said, "That story? It's how I found my way back home, too." Grant looked stunned, and then grateful. That night, Elena crawled into bed beside him. "You weren't nervous?" "I was terrified," he said. "But you did it. Because this time, I wasn't performing. I was just present." She smiled, brushing a thumb against his cheek. "Exactly what I've needed all along." He looked at her for a long time. "You gave me a place I didn't have to earn. You had it the whole time," she whispered. "You just didn't believe you were enough to stay." He kissed her, softly, slowly. No urgency, only presence. And when they fell asleep, his hand never let go of hers. By the time May settled into Windmere Point, Grant no longer flinched when someone recognized his name. Not because the attention had grown, but because the fear had shrunk. The local blog post about Stillwater Hollow had quietly circulated. People came into Shelburne Reed's asking about it. Some wanted a copy. Others simply said, "That story, it felt like my brother, or my father, or me." Elena printed more spiral-bound versions and left them stacked under the counter. No price tag, just a small sign. "Take one. If it speaks to you, pass it on." One afternoon, Elena returned from lunch to find a teenage girl sitting cross-legged by the window, reading a copy of the manuscript. Grant sat across from her. They weren't talking, but they didn't need to. The girl held a highlighter. Her copy was already marked. Elena stepped behind the counter, watching quietly. Grant glanced up, and they exchanged the kind of look only two people who've crossed along silence together can understand. After a while, the girl stood. She handed the copy back to Grant. "I didn't know adults felt like that too," she said. He smiled. "We don't always show it." She nodded, then left without saying more. Grant sat still for a long time after. That evening, Elena found him in the garden, trimming back the lavender. "You okay?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded. "Better than okay. You were quiet when she left. She said something I wish I'd known when I was her age." Elena waited. "That you can be afraid and still be honest." He looked up. "That's what your patience gave me," he said. "A way to be afraid without losing you." Elena reached for his hand, dirt and all. "I didn't need you fearless, Grant. I needed you truthful." They spent the weekend together. No plans, no guests. They walked to the market, cooked together, sat on the porch and listened to the town move slowly. On Sunday morning, Elena read a new book while Grant folded laundry. At one point, he stopped, placed a folded shirt down, and said, "I sent the manuscript." Elena looked up. "To where?" "A small publisher, one that focuses on overlooked stories." She closed her book. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't doing it for approval," he said. "And I wanted to know what it felt like to share something without asking if it was good enough first." She stood, walked over, and kissed his cheek. "That means you're finally writing for you." He nodded. "And I owe that to us." A few days later, Mrs. Langley handed Elena an envelope that had been dropped off at the front desk. The handwriting on the front read, "To the woman who held the silence without pressing it open." Inside was a short note, unsigned. "I read your husband's story. I saw myself in the man who didn't think he deserved to be known. But more than that, I saw myself in the woman who waited without resentment. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't have to be loud to last." Elena tucked the note into her journal, somewhere between a recipe and a grocery list. She didn't tell Grant. Some acknowledgements didn't need to be shared aloud. They were already woven into the quiet fabric of who they'd become. One afternoon, Grant offered to close the bookstore with her. He vacuumed. She organized receipts. They turned off the lights together and locked the door just as the sky began to darken. Outside, they stood still for a moment. "What would you have done if we never reached this point?" Elena asked. Grant thought for a long time. "I think I would have kept pretending nothing was missing," he said. "And eventually I would have convinced myself you were the one who changed." She exhaled slowly. "And now I know I was the one who stopped showing up." He turned to her. But you never stopped making room for me to return. That night, Elena fell asleep with her hand resting on his chest, and Grant, who had once feared being known, rested easily under her palm. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man protecting a version of himself. He felt like a man who had finally decided to live as he was, flawed, quiet, but fully here. 3 weeks after submitting Stillwater Hollow, Grant received a reply. He didn't open it immediately. He carried the envelope from the mailbox to the kitchen, set it beside the fruit bowl, poured coffee, read the label on the oat milk twice, watched the toast go cold. Elena didn't rush him. She came in, saw the envelope, and placed a hand on his back as she passed. "Whatever's inside," she said, "you've already written your way through it." He nodded. But he didn't open it until later. It was a short email, not a printed letter after all. The envelope had been from the distributor, forwarding digital contact on behalf of the small press. The message read, "Dear Grant Merrin, thank you for trusting us with Stillwater Hollow. We would love to include your work in our fall collection. What moved us most was its honesty, not just about pain, but about what happens when people choose to stay. We're not asking for changes, just your permission. Let us know if you're ready. Warmly, the Quiet Press Team." Grant read it twice, then once more. He stood in the hallway for a full minute before walking to the living room. Elena was on the couch, legs tucked under her, reading. He handed her the phone. She read the email silently. When she looked up, her eyes held something soft and full. "They didn't ask you to edit anything." Grant smiled, small but real. "First time in my life, someone said my truth didn't need fixing." She pulled him down beside her, pressed her forehead to his, because it never did. They sat that way for a long time. No celebrations, no noise, just two people who had built something solid on top of what used to be hidden. A few nights later, they sat with Mrs. Langley after closing. Grant wanted to tell her in person. She beamed. "You know, I've seen a lot of men come into this town trying to start over, but you're the first one who didn't try to rewrite the beginning. You just kept writing forward." He smiled. "Because someone kept turning the pages with me." Elena squeezed his hand. Fall came slowly. The garden started to wither, but the lavender hung on. The air changed, crisper, edged with quiet. Grant submitted final approval to the publisher. They didn't change the title, didn't rebrand the voice. They even asked if he wanted to include a dedication. He did. "To the woman who waited without asking, who read what I never said, and who gave me the space to say it anyway." When the advanced copy arrived, Elena was the first to open the box. She pulled out the top book and ran her hand down the matte cover. The title in clean, soft type. No frills, just presence. Inside, the dedication made her pause. She didn't cry. She just leaned back into Grant and said, "Now the world knows what I always did." They didn't throw a party. They didn't announce it. But the book made its way through quiet towns and crowded buses, passed from hand to hand by people who saw themselves in the man who learned to stay. Sometimes Elena overheard people whispering about it in the bookstore. Sometimes they wrote notes and left them tucked in the back pages. Messages like, "This made me reach out to my brother again. I left someone I loved once. I didn't know I could return without shame. Now I do. I didn't believe a man could grow. I do now." Grant never replied to any of them, but he read every one. One evening, as they walked the trail behind their neighborhood, Grant stopped near the old stone bridge. "This is where I almost told you I couldn't do this," he said. Elena blinked. "When?" "Right before you started at the bookstore. I stood here, planning how to explain why I felt so far gone. I couldn't be what you needed. But you didn't say it." "No," he said, "because when I came home, you didn't ask me to be different. You just handed me dinner. Said there was enough if I was hungry." She exhaled. "I wasn't ready for love then," he said. "But you didn't make love conditional on readiness." Elena stepped forward. "I made it conditional on truth. And you found your way to it." He pulled her close, rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you for not treating my distance like rejection. Thank you for not treating my patience like weakness. The next day, Elena added the final copy of Stillwater Hollow to the bookstore shelf. One of the kids, Nico, the quiet one Grant had helped read, watched from across the room. He wandered over, touched the spine, then turned to Grant. You wrote this? Grant nodded. Nico shrugged. I don't like books. That's okay, but I like yours. Grant smiled. Me too. That night, Elena climbed into bed and found a folded note on her pillow. The chapter I never thought I'd write was the one where I stopped pretending. Thank you for loving the version of me that hadn't arrived yet. Now that I'm here, I'm staying. She closed her eyes, pressed the note to her chest, and let the quiet carry her into sleep. Have you ever loved someone through a silence they didn't know how to end? Or maybe you've been the one who stayed hidden, waiting for permission to speak. Let this story remind you, love isn't loud, healing isn't fast, and the most honest stories are written by people who choose to stay. Share this with someone who's still learning how to speak their truth. And if that someone is you, you're not late. You're right on time. Thank you for watching Romance Stories with Mr. Daniel. We'll see you in the next story.